But unless you wanted to do something specific in that demonstration such that the recording itself would be useful, and that is better achieved through like an interactive recording instead of you just like recording it independently and posting it, then we can do that. But otherwise, I think let's do a little catch up that help Jorge, and then let's see for the following meeting what we want to do.
Yeah, no, I think that sounds great. So, okay, so Jorge, I'll just summarize a few things. So, as we were talking right before this recording started, I'm just mentioning it for anyone listening in. After the fact, we sent out a roadmap survey to try to gauge interest on a number of different topics that different stakeholder groups have mentioned at one time or another would be helpful to discuss. This ranges from technical topics, from the FRED API, IHE CSD stuff, and profile specs that the community might help support moving forward, helping to set up integrations and other more technical facility registry topics, to a number of kind of general topics like what is a facility list, how is that distinguished from a master facility list and a facility registry, just helping to reaffirm some of the language around this subject matter, to implementation guidance and other things like that. And then lastly, we wanted to focus on a number of kind of brown bag topics. So sharing what different people who are implementing forms of a facility registry or other applications that are related to a facility registry, just to help them share their progress that they've made, challenges, successes, and kind of what their vision is for those topics. So so I think that's kind of where some of the MFL tool stuff that you're working on, Jorge, would be really interesting to share. And then I know you also had mentioned in the past, having an interest in improving the FRED API, specifically around sharing metadata and things like that in that spec. So.
Yeah, and I'm glad to see that's in the survey, because that's definitely something. What you guys have as far as the FRED API are topics that I'm definitely interested in, such as exposing the metadata, versioning, partial updates.
Yep.
Yeah. Because I think right now it's kind of bulk oriented.
It's not necessarily bulk oriented. I mean, it allows you to do very granular operations.
Yeah.
But just like any API that is like defined by consensus, right? Usually it lags the use cases that need to run ahead, right, and solve a problem. And we need to take that reflection time to say like, we faced this problem in the last year. This is how it got solved, and this is like how we would like to have it solved if we have the time to discuss about it as a community. And it's a very healthy discussion when you've actually had to face the problem beforehand, because then you can actually say this proposed solution would have worked in this case or would have not worked in this case. And you have like a tangible evidence of requirements, and otherwise you can go into la la land with these APIs.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So Jorge, would love to document your interest levels on different things, and particularly see like what things aren't interesting. That's kind of another thing we wanted to see is like are there topics out there that Ed and I think are awesome that other people out there in the community between Rwanda, Tanzania, other countries that are starting to look at creating facility registries, and other technical groups are like, no, not so much interested in that. But
maybe, yeah. I think everything will be of interest to somebody. It's just a matter of what is the most interesting to the most amount of people.
Exactly, and that'll help kind of determine our roadmap and how much time we spend on things and the like. So I think that'll be really helpful.
Well, for me, it's definitely the number one is probably the metadata, sharing that metadata, and because that is what is, I think I've said, is one of the great things about the FRED API is that it's very flexible, and then one of the bad things about the FRED API is it's very flexible.
No, the metadata is essential, and I think we're all kind of just saying, look, we can just agree on the semantics of the metadata of identifiers, right?
Yeah.
On a short time frame, and other things, like the number of beds or stuff was. I think it was above the capability of the group to collaborate on in such an early instance. But now that there's more concrete examples, I think it's going to be easier.
Yeah, and I think something you had pointed out, Scott, which I thought was very important, was when communicating about the facility registry and that metadata, making the differentiation between what is associated with, say, a descriptor of providers or services as opposed to what really is an attribute of a facility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think, there's probably some gray zone, right, between like categories of services that a facility is like officially designated to provide and what a provider what skills an actual provider has. And I think that's where we likely have some conversations with the health worker or provider registry community to help kind of flush that out more accurately, or just help to kind of define that boundary a little bit, because I can kind of see it going both ways, but we want to make sure, in kind of like a true service-oriented type of fashion, we're not creeping into other people's domains too much, and we can really take advantage of what a provider registry has to offer in terms of helping to determine, types of services or people who are actually located within a facility. And I think that'll really, be beneficial in leveraging the registry resources that are being deployed out there. So, like we just had, there's kind of a parallel conversation for the sandbox and demo site for OHIE that's going up, where they're trying to figure out like exactly how that crosswalk should happen, whether it's using CSD or some of the other APIs that are out there. So I think that conversation is already happening, but we need to continue to flesh it out a bit.
And then it's all very interesting stuff, and it will definitely develop over time. And then this is maybe this is off topic, but just our conversation about, so I've got the facilityregistry.org website up, and then it just struck me that if we're talking about a registry as opposed to a facility list, would the APIs also start going into, because it does have obviously the CRUD operations, would it start going into a security model as to, well, who could perform those operations, or what is, say, the workflow, or because then that starts going into governance, right? Because then, as we've said, a facility registry is a list with governance around it.
Yes, 100%. And those are the sort of things that exist in the kind of like in the resource map API, but not in the FRED API still, right? I think that's a perfect example of somewhere where there is an API, because, for example, the Tanzanian solution relies on that, right? And let me see if I can forward you here in the Hangout, in the chat. Boom, boom. Yeah, that looks right.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the sort of API activity, and you can go up top to the index, where you would see that, like, here's the sort of like APIs that are not just about facility lists, but about the management of the facilities. And
okay.
Right. So, for example, and here there's more about like the security info. So I'm going to paste another one, and this one is related to the metadata.
And so I think part of this is like the work that's been done, like specifically in Tanzania and some of the other implementations around, the native resource map API that is already out there. We want to try to catch some of that up in the FRED API, around metadata security and all the like.
Sure.
Jorge, any other questions on this right now, or I can give you a couple other updates on other areas that we're working on and some other interesting things that are happening?
No, please proceed.
Yeah, sure. So we actually reached a really nice milestone in Tanzania. They have started the district level training of their district health officers, or district medical officers, I think they call them DMOs, to drive the curation process for their facility registry. Essentially, this is like a national rollout of training of people on collecting their facility data that they didn't have yet, entering it into their curation app, setting forth that kind of like governance and curation structure, and then storing that all in their facility registry that's been implemented for a while in Tanzania. So it's nice to see a lot of new users coming into the system, that training moving forward, and we hope to see the this expanded data collection process kicked off shortly thereafter. and a lot of the kind of like finer grained details of facility data that they wanted collected into the system. So, excuse me. So I think they've hit a really nice kind of milestone marker. And the next steps that we're talking with the ministry and CDC and UCC, the local technology partner, about there are, well, how do we start to prioritize and move forward with the integrations that they want to do in country between, DHIS as like an aggregate indicator store at the facility level, between medical record systems, OpenLMIS. There's actually a fairly long list of systems working in Tanzania. And so that's kind of the first next step they want. And then also looking into something that they're calling a public or institutional portal. And essentially what they want is like a specifically and localized interface that's branded around the Ministry of Health. That kind of has all the right graphics and colors and text and a basic public interface that's not, the reference implementation tool or resource map, but like something that's theirs that consumes the master facility list in the registry as well. And so I think those are kind of the next steps for them now that they've hit this first milestone and are starting to do some of the curation processes. But yeah, we're definitely happy to see that there have kind of been some like compounding delays with scheduling things within the ministry, and I think they've managed to sort those out and are moving forward now nicely. So that's a great thing to see. And I think this the pertinent thing to you, Jorge, is I think Tanzania would be a pretty good example of somewhere that the MFL reconciliation tool could be of great value, because there are a decent number of systems, and I don't believe they're standardized across the different data sources yet, since they're just getting their facility registry up and running. Mm-hmm. So it'd be a great example where you kind of already have that master list designated in the tool, right? We would pick, hey, this existing list is the master list, but partner A, B, C, and D, aren't yet using that list because they're still relying on their kind of legacy facility data that's out there. So, anyways, just wanted to mention that as you guys are starting to scope that out. But,
yeah.
I guess another interesting thing is we've been having some kind of introductory meetings with a team at Concern International and kind of a statistician from Boeing. Is that right, Ed? I'm trying to think of what Kelly's role is, but anyways, they're interested in creating an application that helps to identify where resources should be placed based on the current facilities, demographic data, and kind of topography and roadmaps. And so what their interest in the facility registry as well, part of their algorithms that they have to identify where to build new health facilities or place new ambulances, those are kind of the first two things that they're focusing on, is, well, we really have to have like a good facility list that we want to work off of. And I see Ed mentioning that he's a quantitative modeler, but I'm not sure.
Boeing uses a lot of those, to make sure that the brain doesn't vibrate itself into pieces or something.
Exactly. Anyways, but it's kind of an interesting idea, because it's starting to translate what is in some ways a bit of like a facility list is at its core just a core piece of infrastructure that helps facilitate a lot of things. But it's a nice way that we're starting to see that potentially health outcomes could be improved based on this facility list. So so we're having some introductory discussions around, hey, what would this tool look like? How could it take advantage of facility registries? And what other data sources might they need to kind of take advantage of and operationalize to help identify, like, hey, here, based on my population density and how the road networks are, this is really where I would want to build my next facility if I had $100,000, for instance. So kind of venturing a bit into like the health system planning and strengthening aspects of how the facility registry could improve those anyways. But so yeah,
that sounds like what I've been talking about as far as so we collect data as far as results. Mm-hmm. And so, like you said, a facility list really is at its core is just data around some infrastructure. Mm-hmm. When you create an interpretation or correlation of that data with other things, then it starts becoming knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
like when you start getting into coverage and capabilities of a particular facility and where it is at now, as opposed to what it should be.
Yeah.
I also think that portal thing is really interesting, because one of the keys to getting that facility list into becoming a master facility registry is the socialization of the list.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the buy-in of like people at the ministry, and that they can see like, oh, this is like where I can see this thing. It's not just like this headless, machine behind the scenes, but it's like, oh, here's my nice branded and like visual representation of my master facility list that I can play with easily and all that kind of stuff. So I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to be important, especially in all these. I was in a meeting with someone else, and they had said if it's great if you have a master facility list, but if nobody knows it, do you really have one?
Exactly. Probably not. Well, unless they did at one point and then they just take for granted that it's there, right? I don't know. But I totally agree, right? Like, what's the point of creating that master list if it's then just put on a shelf, sits there for 5 years, and then is out of date and you have to re-update it, right? So it should be something that is actively used on a routine basis. So totally agree. Jorge, one interesting thing I just was thinking about is like with this kind of resource planning algorithm application that I was mentioning, is one thing that came up is like, how do you really tie improvements that are made to a health system to like tangible improvements in outcomes for patients, or other kind of like process indicators, if you will, or output indicators, however we want to kind of frame it in an M&E kind of way. But essentially, a very interesting thing in my mind would be able to say, hey, we built this facility in a certain town because we thought there was a need based on the data we had available in this algorithm. But then, a year or two after that, we could look at kind of the related metrics and M&E indicators associated with that particular area, and kind of do like a pre-post type of comparison, saying like, hey, this really did improve the health system in this area in a tangible way, and here's actually X, Y, and Z. What happened? We saw more consultations, we saw less or lower child mortality, and those kind of things. That would be, I think, an incredibly nice thing to kind of start to tie in planning with actual data on the outcomes of that planning or improvements that are made, and kind of bring it full cycle. So I don't know, perhaps something that we can consider brainstorming in the future once we get a lot of these facility registries up and running and scope out this tool with these guys a bit more.
Absolutely. I mean, that's in line with what we want to do as far as, we need the facility registry in place so that we can do better reporting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And then that might be, and which goes, I think one of the things on the survey is also versioning of the FRED API, but also is there versioning of the data updates made to a facility registry? Let me look at the API real quick. Yeah. Just because it might be interesting to see changes in a facility over time. Because we have spoken about, just to what you were just saying, if you made a certain type of investment over time in a facility, would you be able to see that you got better results?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's two versioning approaches that are coming. Let me just go check. However, I know that
obviously there's a versioning of the API itself.
Yeah,
right?
Of course. Yeah.
Which is critical, so that data interchange can happen. You both have a handshake agreement on the version of the contract.
Yep.
But, the versioning of the data itself.
Right, and there's two approaches to that. One of them is first of all, you can version a set, right? Mm-hmm. Because, for example, you might want to say, hey, look, if sometimes you want to look at the facilities as a set, right, as a whole group. So, for example, if you take an X-ray machine from one and add it to another one, right? Mm-hmm. You still want to do like a kind of aggregate or kind of group level analysis on the facilities, and for that we have the notion of the snapshots, right? Where you can go and you can say, let's say every quarter or every end of the year, I want to take a snapshot, and it's like a named version of all the facilities in the collections at that point in time, right? And that's one approach. And then the other one is facility by facility. For each facility, you get the history of updates and what are the changes that have happened. And I'm looking up. June. Where is the documentation for that? Hold on one second. Here you go. Let me just paste it back in. And this is another example of stuff that needs to make it in. Why is my screen so slow? Hold on one second. Needs to make it into the Fred API. So you can go at it for every particular site. You can go past in time, back in time, and query kind of like what does this facility look like at a certain version number, right?
Yeah, cool. Okay.
Right, and so between the snapshots, it allows you to keep like a group level snap of things, and then the facility level, you could do all sorts of. This is as granular as it gets with information, but the snapshots allow you to, for example, it would be very complicated to go for the 20,000 facilities and say which version number was the right version at a certain date, right? And try to extract that. So the snapshots allow you to just say, this captures everything I care about right now. But yeah, there's also like the facility change by change thing. And also it's important for other systems sometimes to subscribe to these things, right? Because for example, if you're closing a facility, you might need to, another system might need to take some action on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so here in the Activity Stream API, you basically get like a stream of events saying, oh, facility added, facility deleted, facility data changed, layer added, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And,
right.
And this is, for example, how DHIS could subscribe to the facility registry and say, I only want to go and get a new list snapshot every time something gets created or deleted, because I just care about like which ones exist, not about their data.
Right. So it's instead of being like based on some kind of cron job or something like that, it's actually based on an event.
Right, exactly. And then it can be as high bandwidth and high volume, or as little bandwidth and volume as you care about, because you just subscribe to the sort of events that you want.
Right, and it sounds like this would feed into then the that governance and workflow and curating.
Exactly. When in more complex environments like Rwanda, or those that might have like a health information exchange that is more mature, what these events would probably do is trigger a workflow that would probably notify other groups and other peoples and other systems about stuff. Right. For example, a supply chain solution needs to get notified that a site is being decommissioned. Right. So in a more integrated environment, and this is a very common pattern to let the services that are the masters of their own little world of data to trigger workflows and activities into other systems. Because otherwise, the alternative is everybody's polling, and they don't really know what they're polling about, and what they're going to do. They're going to poll for facility data and see what changed. That all has to happen internally here anyways. It's the role of a registry as a authoritative source to know when things have changed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you get it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is cool stuff. This is good. This is definitely taking what we have now and really long-term vision, making it a lot more robust.
Yeah. And for Tanzania, it was essential to have that because we had to have like the audit trail of what things have happened to these facilities, so it had to be easy to manage. But it existed from before. I mean, I think Tanzania just made us kind of like polish it a little bit.
Right. I'll definitely have to look at this more thoroughly. This is definitely, and this is all stuff within the core of Resource Map.
Right. This all is stuff that is up and running and existing already in the Resource Map stuff. And what we want to do is want to take the requirements that drove these APIs and take the trade-offs that we did while designing these particular API implementations and bring that whole body of knowledge to the FRED process, right? Mm-hmm. We'll say, look, this is how we did per facility versioning, right? And here's what we liked about it. Here's what we didn't like about it. Let's talk about what we would like to see, and let's stand on all that, on top of all that experience, and do something that is more consensus based, while making sure that it meets the requirements of those who've actually had to build on top of it. So the next Tanzania, so to speak, is building on the more consensus-based Fred API.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of like the general life cycle we imagine.
That's great, and it's important from real world experience and what you guys liked and what you didn't like, what you thought would work, and what actually happened.
Yeah, and anytime you do an implementation of something, you also make trade-offs, right? So you say like, we ourselves don't think that this is the perfect solution, to every 100%, to 100% of all particular scenarios, and these were the trade-offs we knew we did. So sometimes if you say if you could do a do-over, here's what you would do better, right? And this also gives a chance to bring that to the table.
Cool. Well, I can toss a couple other updates out there as we're kind of nearing I guess not really the end of our call, but kind of the midpoint here. So, Jorge, I'm not sure if I mentioned this yet, but I'll just reiterate it. We, I guess, Instead and HISP and Bob Joliffe and DHS team there, along with the provider registry people and a couple other OHIE members, particularly Gemby, attended something called a Connect-a-thon in Chicago, where we tested out the care services discovery profile and kind of ran a bunch of tests, made sure that our systems could all communicate with each other using the appropriate profile and standards associated with it. I believe all 4 groups passed with flying colors, which is kind of a nice first step for that profile. And now kind of the next stage for us is to I guess start to look into what kind of change proposals and updates to the profile that we might want to make. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the profile, Jorge, but it was essentially, the very first time this had ever been tested, and it's kind of like fresh out of the chute. There's a lot of things that could be improved, and I think different members of the community would like to see updated in the profile. And so now we're going to start moving into probably a process of, okay, what kind of change proposals need to happen? How do we kind of take it to the next step, clean it up a bit, get rid of some of those blemishes and ugly spots in the profile, and get it into a little bit healthier of a state in the second iteration. But I guess we hit a nice milestone in that we passed our first Connect-a-thon test and have a nice shiny certificate somewhere that I probably still need to print out and can put on my wall as a trophy of sorts. So anyways, wanted to share that was successful, and
congratulations.
Yeah, it was an interesting experience sitting in the basement of this hotel in Chicago with like 400 maybe 500 programmers all vigorously typing away, and they have their various medical devices and things like that set up, and it was kind of cool. It was a fun experience. So and definitely a good time just to work together with the DHS folks and provider registry and Gemby and all these guys. So good to get us in a room and collaborating a bit. So so Ed, I'm not sure any other updates that I'm missing. I'm kind of I think those are kind of the main things that have happened over the last month or so. But
thanks, Scott. So there's definitely been a lot of activities, and I think one of the challenges for us, and one of the reasons why we sent out that survey, is to actually get the pulse of the attendees of all the different sort of flavors of organizations and projects and so on that have been engaged in facility registry stuff, and try to see where is the common need as a community. So I think there's been a lot of stuff happening. I don't think that we've not mentioned any of the interesting ones that are going on, but there's definitely at least half a dozen threads where we're supporting other groups run along their own paths. And I think part of what we need to work on now is just try to see how can the community process support them better. But I don't think we're forgetting anything, Scott. Let me see. Obviously, when we met with the team last week, obviously the MFL work was an important part of what was going on, and no, there wasn't anything else going on as far as facility registry stuff goes. I don't know, unless you want to mention things like, website updates, guide updates, and things that are less engineering front.
I think those are kind of standard. Yeah. One thing that did come to mind that I forgot about is we were making an improvement to how an anonymous user or a public user could access a collection in Resource Map. Currently, you kind of either turn the public on or off, and you can't really control which data elements they're able to see. A public user can't edit any data within a collection, but there was a kind of interest in like, hey, maybe I am storing things like contact details, or I have data elements where the quality is pretty low and I don't really want to make that public yet. So we were working to kind of improve the per user permissions for a public or anonymous user. So that way you could group fields that you didn't want to share publicly in its own layer within a collection. And then
well, if you stretch that a little further, it's not even just anonymous users. It's really so, for example, we do data collection in Promise, and what happens is that when you're entering in data, you might not want to see your approver see that because it's not done yet, right? So you don't want it to reflect poorly on you because it's a partial update.
Yep.
And so that might be something where in, say, the clinic or the hospital might have been delegated responsibility for updating their data, but they might not want the district manager to see it until they finished all the updates.
Yep.
So I would take that case and just abstract it where it's anonymous is just, or user is just one role, and that's just one use case, but it's within a domain of use cases that are similar to each other.
No, and I think one of this was more like a gap that we found, right? In the sense that the permission setting and like the granularity is really fine-grained. And it's just that it was all really good for users whose name you know, right?
Right.
Like you could even say like by site who can see what and who can update what, right? And by lots of other characteristics. It was just like the user quote anonymous was not part of that whole scheme. It was like a very big blunt club of anonymous people can see stuff or they cannot see stuff. Right. And now what we're doing is we're just folding anonymous into the regular authorization framework that exists for everybody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
And would that be useful for sharing the data with the portal that Tanzania is?
Right. And what Tanzania is actually doing is they have a specific accounts that can get access to some data or not some of the other data, right? And using that. But we also want it to be just something that is native from from the API. So the public facing portal, let's say if you didn't want it to see bank account numbers, which arguably that's a good idea, then you would create a user for the public facing exposure of information called the public portal user or something, and then you would assign that user specific permissions. And what we're just doing now is also allowing you to assign those specific permissions to our quote anonymous users, so you don't even have to pretend to impersonate that public portal user that you made up. Yeah, it's just making things a bit easier.
Yeah, this one actually came out of Rwanda, where they're not necessarily looking to create a public portal, but they did want to share kind of the user interface there in a public way, but not all of their data elements. So. So we're looking forward to getting that out into production, and we think it'll be a helpful feature for people. But yeah. So Jorge, any questions, or would it be helpful to talk about MFL stuff a little bit, or should we leave that for our check-in later today with Dana and the rest of the team?
That's up to you. If you'd like to discuss that, I'm fine with that.
Okay. Why don't we wait until we have Nico on the line and Dana? I think that would be helpful. I just wanted to see if you had any kind of immediate questions or topics that would be helpful to discuss. I guess the only other thing I would mention just today is we also forwarded along that technical support concept note, and would love to get your guys' feedback on that. I shared it with Mike kind of initially because he was asking for it from us for a little bit, and we wanted to make sure he got a chance to see it, and just forwarded it on to you guys, and would like to get your input as well. So
sure.
All right, great. Well, Ed, any other things you'd want to chat about today, or should we wrap up a few minutes early?
Yeah, you and I can catch up offline and continue working on this off the air.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, Jorge. Well, thanks for joining today, and we'll talk in a little bit on our other MFL specific call. But
sure, thank you. Always informative. It's always a pleasure talking to you guys.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking a look at that survey too when you get a chance.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Jorge. Take care. Bye-bye.